What's up, guys? Void here, coming back at y'all with another Commander deck tech. This was pulled off to my patrons, and they voted and chosen the 90s baby Commander format. This is going to be what we form this deck tech around. All of these cards are actually from the 90s, or originally printed from the 90s. Obviously, with the format that I specified, go check out that video. You can use cards from any set so long as they were originally printed from a set in the 90s. I think that it's perfectly fine. But for this video, you're going to see a lot of original card images, even from all the way back in Alpha. The commander that I chose to build around, since I wasn't really specific with the poll, was Merieke Berit. She is a 3-mana Esper-colored 1/1 legendary human. She doesn't untap during your untap step, but she has a pretty sweet activated ability: gain control of target creature as long as you control Merieke, and when she leaves play or becomes untapped, destroy that creature. It can't be regenerated. Now, the difficult part about making this deck was there's so many ways that you can interact with creatures, especially with tap abilities, but a lot of those cards are after the 90s, especially when we look at Mirrodin block and a lot of those powerful cards. So we definitely miss out on a lot of powerful cards, but that's the format in general that I wanted to build. But she is pretty good either way. There are some cards that are going to interact with her, and one really good card that I'm going to get to once we head on to our enchantments. But even if there isn't like any epic combo potential and your resources are rather limited, she is still a pretty decent commander, especially if you want to go with control. But the theme of the deck is going to be just stealing your opponent's stuff. Even if it isn't with Merieke, we still want to use enchantments, steal our opponent's stuff from the graveyard even. There's definitely some ways that we can make use of our opponent's creatures. As always, we're going to take a look at our lands first, and believe it or not, there isn't really that many to choose from the 90s, but you look at City of Brass, originally from Arabian Nights, gonna give us whatever mana that we need. One of those lands that's still gonna see play regardless of whether or not it's a 90s only format. Then we have City of Shadows from the Dark. This one is actually really cool with Merieke because we can exile a creature we control, and then we put a storage counter on it, and then we can tap it for X mana, where X is the number of storage counters. So it's going to build up the mana, which mana isn't an easy thing to come by, especially with this type of format. But even if you ignore that, being able to exile creatures instead of having them just be destroyed and go back to your opponent's graveyard is definitely preferable. Then we have Maze of Ith, also from the Dark originally. So why not? We are going to be playing control, and part of control is keeping our opponents from attacking us. Moving on to our artifacts, there are some decent ones, but there isn't anything good for mana fixing aside from 1 or 2 cards. So we have to focus on our ramp with Mana Crypt, Mana Vault, and Soul Ring. These are definitely some of the best ones you can come across, and all were originally printed in the 90s. I believe Mana Crypt was a promotional card, but it was still printed in the 90s. We do have a Felwar Stone though. That was originally printed in the Dark, so that's going to be a decent source of mana fixing for us, and hopefully we're able to get that out. We have a Mind Stone because I believe that was printed in Weatherlight, also from the 90s. This is one of those awesome mana rocks that's going to see play regardless of whether or not it's a 90s format, because it can sack itself to draw us a card and ramp us up by 1. And kind of the same idea as Maze of Ith, we have a Crawl Space. No more than 2 creatures can attack us each combat. I believe this was originally from Urza's block somewhere. And then we have Puppet Strings. You may tap or untap target creature. This is one of those cards I mentioned before that is going to fool around with Merieke. Paying 2, tapping this to untap her, basically means that we get rid of a creature that we gain control of, which we don't always want to do that. Sometimes we gain control of a really good creature and we just want to swing with it. Mostly what we're going to use this for is to gain control of another creature that we really want, because Merieke doesn't untap on her own. We have a Soul Grail. This is a card that you probably don't see at all in normal Commander, but enters the battlefield, you choose a color, and then it taps for 1 mana of that chosen color. So it's not going to be like your typical 3 mana taps for 1 of any color, because most of those were post 90s, so you can't play with them at all. But this should definitely do it. I mean, it's 3 colorless, so if you're short on any mana that you need, this is likely going to get the job done. We have a Bubble Matrix. This one is funny. All damage dealt to creatures is reduced to 0. So we want to steal the best creature. We want to leave up some blockers. This is a decent way of doing it, and Merieke is only a 1/1, so even if we have to block with her, preventing that damage is amazing. We have a Helm of Obedience, because why not? We do have a way to kind of mill out our opponents, but it's mainly in here so that we can steal something. Either way, a good card, also from the 90s. Helm of Possession. This one is also pretty sweet with Merieke. We steal a creature with her, and then we sacrifice that creature, gain control of another creature. So a kind of a decent combo there, not a huge huge combo, but it's definitely a way that we can steal multiple creatures away from our opponents. We have a Nevinyrral's Disc because we don't have the best removal in the 90s format, so having something that can deal with all artifacts, creatures, and enchantments, because remember, there aren't any planeswalkers in this format, so if you really hate planeswalkers, you'll probably like 90s baby, but either way, removal is lacking, so you need to depend on something like this. And then we do have a Thran Dynamo for even more ramp. It's not absolutely necessary, but if you're looking for cards to insert into a deck like this, why not go for some of the best mana rocks? Moving on to our creatures, we have 11 of them. We have Mother of Runes. I believe she was originally from Urza's Legacy. Either way, she's going to give our Merieke anything else that we really need. Protection from a chosen color, which in this format, I predict this card to be absolutely devastating for any opponent to have to deal with. Then we have a Gilded Drake. Talking about stealing our opponent's creatures, Gilded Drake is also pretty nice. Not really any way that we can combo with it that I'm aware of, but if you have any way to get creatures back from our graveyard, hopefully Gilded Drake is one of those creatures that's in there. We have a Coffin Queen, yet another good 90s creature from Tempest. Kind of the same deal as Merieke, you get to choose to not untap it during your untap phase, has an activated ability of 3 mana, and it taps to put target creature card from any graveyard into play under your control, and you remove that creature from the game if Coffin Queen becomes untapped or if you lose control of her. So kind of the same exact deal as Merieke, also a 1/1, but you get the whole purpose of this. It's just stealing our opponent's creatures. Hopefully they have a lot of good ones. We have Daring Apprentice. This is also one of the things about this format is that there's not too many good counter spells, so having something like this that can sacrifice itself to counter a spell is pretty sweet, considering that likely when we do it, we're going to have absolutely no mana to have to pay. It just taps and sacrifices itself, so pretty much a free counter spell at the time. We also have Preacher. This one is really cool from the dark. You gain control of target creature of an opponent's choice that he or she controls for as long as Preacher remains tapped. So it's not as good because it is of their choice, but hopefully they're playing Voltron, so you can gain control of their really awesome Voltron commander. Then we have a Royal Assassin. Again, removal's kind of sparse in this format. Having this on a creature destroys target tapped creature. It's a way to keep your opponents at the very least from attacking you. We have Sea Singer. When you control no islands, you have to sacrifice it, but who really cares? Because also kind of the same exact thing, you gain control of a target creature whose controller controls an island, and it's the same exact thing for as long as it remains tapped. Then we have Aura Thief. When it's put into a graveyard from play, you gain control of all enchantments. Really devastating. Kind of goes along with the theme of the rest of the deck. Instead of gaining control of creatures though, you're going to be gaining control of all enchantments, which even in a 90s only format, there are still some pretty powerful ones. We have Clone because we need some utility, and one of those oldest clones, the original one. Not the worst thing to have in a control deck. We're not technically stealing something, but we're pretty much getting whatever our opponents have. And then we have Norit. This one combos with Merieke. We can untap target blue creature, so we have a way of gaining control of creatures or just destroying creatures that we don't want. The other ability is kind of useless, but mainly in here for the first one. And then our last creature is a Karmic Guide, because some of our creatures in our graveyard are useful to us. We want to bring them back, and Karmic Guide is also pretty sweet. Flying protection from black. Moving on to our enchantments, we have 14 of them. We have the Land Tax. This one is one of the best enchantments in the format, and having it in a deck where we could be outpaced, we are playing control. We don't have aggressive land ramp strategies, so getting as many as 3 basics from our library to our hand is pretty sweet. Mystic Remora, basically the older cousin of Rhystic Study. It does have the cumulative upkeep, so it's not guaranteed to last forever, but it pretty much is the same exact idea. You're taxing your opponents, or they're going to give you card draw. Either way, fantastic. Animate Dead, bringing a creature back from a graveyard. Technically, it could be considered stealing from our opponents. Copy Artifact. Enters the battlefield as a copy of an artifact that's on the battlefield, still technically considered an enchantment. Same idea, stealing, copying, I guess you could consider it. And then we have Legacies Allure. During your upkeep, you get to put a treasure counter on Legacies Allure, and then you get to sacrifice it. It's an activated ability. Permanently gain control of target creature with power no greater than the number of treasure counters on Legacies Allure. So 2 mana enchantment that's going to sit on the board until you decide that it's time to cash in on it and gain control of a creature that you really want. Like I said before, removal isn't the best thing in this format, so pacifism I think is really cool that we're going to put something like this in this deck. Enchanted creature can't attack or block, so it's our way of getting rid of a creature. We're not exiling it or destroying it, so this could really mess with some Voltron strategies. I think it's definitely worth considering. And then we have Steel Enchantment. We just gain control of enchanted enchantment. Pretty straightforward. Aura of Silence. Artifact and enchantment spells your opponent's cast cost 2 more. We can sacrifice it to destroy an artifact or enchantment, so kind of doubles as good removal and also amazing taxing. And now we have the amazing card I was mentioning earlier, Intruder Alarm. This is what's really going to combo with Merieke. Creatures don't untap during their controller's untap steps, but whenever a creature comes into play, you untap all creatures. So Merieke is going to untap multiple times, so hopefully our opponents are going to play creatures. That way we can just keep untapping her, destroying creatures that we gain control of, and then we can just do this multiple times. So it's practically going to be a board wipe. There's a lot of nastiness with this deck, but in the 90s, Intruder Alarm is unfortunately all that we can really fool around with, seeing as Paradox Engine is far from the 90s. Then we have a Propaganda. Keeping our opponents from attacking us is always nice. Control Magic, pretty straightforward, steals a creature. We have Steal Artifact, basically the same thing as Steal Enchantment, but for artifacts. And then we have a Treachery, basically a way better control magic that is pretty much free. Comes into play, you untap up to 5 lands, you control the enchanted creature. And then we have Confiscate, 6 mana, pretty expensive, but definitely worth it. We control the enchanted permanent. Moving on to our sorceries, we have 6 of them. We have a Reanimate. Again, taking any creature card from your opponent's graveyard, I would consider that stealing. For 1 black mana, that's really efficient. We of course have Demonic Tutor, because if we don't have the best cards to choose from, even if we don't have all the other combo cards, and Demonic Tutor, even though we aren't going to be comboing hard, we still have cards like Intruder Alarm that we want to get to. We have Ashes to Ashes, exiles 2 target non-artifact creatures, deals 5 damage to you, but really good. 3 mana, exiling removal. Then we have a Wrath of God, 4 mana, destroys all creatures, they can't be regenerated. Why not? This is already control. Then we have a Bribery. Technically, I think this was at the cutoff point. Arcadian Masks was the last set in the 90s, so just barely made it into this deck. We get to steal a creature from our opponent's library and then put it into play. Really busted card. A ton of cool things you can choose from. And then our last sorcery is a Time Warp, because why not? Again, this isn't going to be a heavy combo deck, but Time Warp, when you have the potential of doing a lot of things, even if you aren't going to be comboing, even if you aren't planning on recurring your Time Warp, it's still decent to take an extra turn. Moving on to the last part of the deck, which is instants, we have 17 of them. Brainstorm isn't really that great, but considering that it's one of the few cantrips from the 90s, why not? Drawing 3 cards and then putting 2 back on top, I think you're still going to end up seeing some more cards, which in control that can be a big difference. And then we follow up our Demonic Tutor with Enlightened Tutor and Mystical Tutor, as well as Vampiric Tutor. All 3 of those within these colors, I think it's not a bad thing. We have a bunch of instant sorceries. For Mystical Tutor, Enlightened Tutor, we have Intruder Alarm, we have some other artifacts, and with Vampiric Tutor, we can just pretty much tutor up anything. And then we have a Twiddle. This one is pretty straightforward. Tap or untap target artifact or creature or land. We're going to use this on Merieke to untap her, destroying a creature, and then gaining control of another one. We have Arcane Denial, because there are a few counter spells, and why not settle for this one? It's going to get you some card draw. Also going to give your opponent some card draw, but it's still worth it. And that artwork is just amazing. And we of course have Counterspell, one of the original cards from Alpha. Might as well play this. 2 mana Counterspell. Can't really get much better than that in this deck. And then we have a Disenchant. 2 mana, destroys target artifact or enchantment. And then we have Limdul's Vault. We look at the top 5 cards of our library. As many times as we choose, we get to pay 1 life, put those cards on the bottom of our library in any order, and then look at the top 5 again, and then we shuffle our library once we decided on the 5 that we really like, and then we put those on top in any order. So really powerful card. We don't always have the best cantrips or the best top deck manipulation, so Limdul's Vault is going to have to do. We of course have Mana Drain, because why not? We're a control deck. Even though these are a little bit more expensive, Mana Drain is definitely worth it. Gives you a ton of mana your next turn. We have a Capsize, because it's amazing removal on a buyback. Believe it or not, this is arguably one of those cards that if you have enough mana, you could just keep buying it back, and then eventually you can bounce back multiple things in a turn, making it to where it's going to be extremely difficult for our opponents to get back in the game. And then we have Debt of Loyalty. We regenerate a target creature and then gain control of that creature. So if we want to save one of our opponent's creatures from destruction, we can just regenerate it and then gain control of it. So yet another cool steal effect. And then we have Frantic Search. This is one of those cantrips from the 90s that I'm absolutely in love with. It's just kind of like your loot effect, so it doesn't technically replace itself, but you draw 2 cards and then you choose and discard 2, and then you untap up to 3 lands. So it's pretty much a free loot. Really powerful, even if you're not comboing with it. And then we do have a Rewind. I think I might have to take back earlier what I said about this deck not having the best counter spells, because there are some really good ones now that I think about it. Rewind untaps up to 4 lands once you counter a spell, so kind of like the other ones from Urza's block where you untap lands and they're pretty much free. There's a bunch of those annoying cards, and this one is no exception. Pretty much frees up your other counterspell mana. And then we have Desertion. This one is also really sweet and on flavor with the deck. We counterspell, and if it's an artifact or creature, we put that card onto the battlefield under our control instead of its owner's graveyard. So really cool, another steal effect. And then our last card of the deck is Force of Will, because why not? This is another 90s counterspell. Really expensive, I know, but definitely worth it if you want to be able to counter spells. And hey, these were all from the 90s. Technically, every single card on this list was originally printed in the 90s. So anyway, guys, hope you enjoyed this. Let me know if you have any suggestions, especially when it comes to lands. I think there are maybe some more budget options I can look for that are going to offer some mana fixing that I might not know about. But this was a little bit of a challenge. You don't always have the best things to choose from, but I think I made a pretty decent deck here with what I was able to choose from. But as always, you guys have a wonderful day. Void here signing off. See you all next video.